Hello guys, it's Sakuems. Welcome back to my channel. So in this week's video, I'm going to do another speed paint for my Patreon boxes. So if you don't know what it is, basically I have a Patreon page where you can support me every month. And only on Patreon there is the Sakuems boxes that has a lot of different content. So if you'd like to check it out, the link will be in the corner and in the description right below the video. This piece that you are going to see is basically one of the prize for one of the Patreon who is pledging to get the box. So there is 15 available each month, and one of those Patreon will basically win this original artwork. And for those who can't get on Patreon, you can also just get this as a print on my Etsy store. So with that being said, now let's get into the actual time-lapse of the artwork. So this piece was done on my perfect coloring paper. That is the one I use for Copic markers. And at first I wanted to do a free marker challenge for this week's video, but I actually tried to pick a few, tried to pick the colors and do a random pick, and I ended up with a very odd color combination. And it's a fun thing to do as a challenge, but since this piece is going to be one of the prize for Patreon, I just figured it would be quite hard for me to make something kind of nice and worth basically pledging for to win the piece. So I will do a free market challenge in a future video, but I had to scrape that idea, and I just wanted to have a bit more fun with color combination, and that's kind of what the topic that I want to discuss a bit in this video is how to pick colors and how to create dimension with your artworks. I'm not going to do an actual tutorial because this is going to take a lot more time, but I still had learned a lot with this piece, and so I would like to share that with you. In terms of inspiration, so I want to credit Audra Eau Claire artwork. This piece, the colors that I've used, the color scheme I've used is directly inspired from her artwork Hues. Rue, I think it's called Rue, and I really love all of her work, to be honest. She has an incredible style, and the way she paints, the way she colors, just overall aesthetic is really amazing to me. And every piece that I saw of her gets me inspired, and especially the ones where she combined those colors, so green and red. And that is a very different palette from my own hues. I rarely use red, and I also very rarely use green. So combining those and using the same color scheme as this artwork that she's has done was very interesting and a lot of fun. It really helps to work with inspiration and references from a color perspective, because you get basically to learn how to connect the colors and how to build the contrast and everything. So that's very interesting. And I found a sketch that I really liked, and I really wanted to make this artwork for a long time, but I just didn't really think it was that interesting. And since the color scheme for this piece is a little bit more defined and just a bit more interesting, it adds dimension to the character, and I don't know, it gives another feeling. It's not just a pretty girl with flowers, it's a little bit more. Okay, this is not sponsored by Audra Eau Claire. It is not. I don't know if she watches my video. I think she does. What I like the most about her and other artists, but in general within her work, she has very interesting ideas. But even the most basic character, the way she colors and the way she builds the contrast and the overall ambience and just everything combined gives something like an edge to the piece that you will not have with more basic shading or more basic coloring. I feel like, whenever someone asks me how do you pick colors and what is a good skin tone or things like that, you can use every single color as a skin tone. You can use every single color as a hair color. There's no set rules. The only rule you can have in approaching color theory is to have a bit of a balance to it, and to find colors that work together, either because they are in the same hues or the same brightness or the same color family. And either they clash, so you create like a nice contrast, which is the case if I have like green next to red, or they really blend together, which is the case when you have some sort of yellow with a green, or purple with a red, etc. So that's one thing that I really enjoyed with like basically studying Audrey Auclair's artwork, and in general all my inspiration, because I do use a lot of colors. I use a lot of inspiration from people who are using colors as well, and the way they'll build the shading and everything, it's really interesting to study that and to try to not copying it. I'm not actually, I try my best to find a perfect match, but I still had my own twist to it. It's a little bit more there's a bit more color, there's a bit more saturation to what I did, and also my contouring is a lot darker, but the majority of the color scheme was still very in sync with what Audrey is doing. And I really enjoyed that because I had a pretty limited palette. I will list all the colors in the description below the video if you'd like to know. There are a few colors that were a little bit hard to match because I think she's using paints and I'm using direct tones with my markers, so I had to do a lot of blending and find some colors to combine other shades with, like especially on the skin tone there's like I think 10 markers. So that was a little bit tricky, but it just shows that you can actually do very interesting color mixes with Copic markers because of how the ink is made. You'll have a lot of room to play with. You have a lot of ability to mix and match colors. You can push the colors together. You can add, if you press a bit harder on an area, you can actually push the colors and the marker you're using will show more because of the ink spreading basically. And yeah, it's basically like watercolors, but you have a bit more control because there's no water involved. The Copic line is very well made because it's pretty simple to find a color that can match another one. You just have to look at the number and also the family of the color. For example, any purple works well with another purple. Any red can actually mix pretty well with an orange or a pink, for example. And yeah, and the thing is though, if you are wondering like how to pick colors, the best recommendation I can have for you is to actually try to study from references, and especially from references from the tool you're going to use with. So don't look like precisely at like actual photos. It's better to look at Copic marker artwork if you want to use alcohol markers. It's better to look at like watercolor work if you want to use watercolors, because usually a lot of tutorials, a lot of speed paint and videos online, they do have a basic palette and they tell you what color they use, and you can see how they fuse and how they mix and what colors work with what colors. There's a lot of information and a lot of resources on Pinterest. Whenever I don't know how to mix a specific shade because I have no idea, even based on my chart, I go on Pinterest and I type the color number, and you'll have a lot of swatches and people who did like some gradients and had fun with that. And it gives a lot of information that you can actually use that and try to make it your own. So what I usually do is every single color that I use in my artwork is never really shaded with the same hues. I basically very rarely shade a blue with a dark blue, and I also very rarely use a red and a dark red. I always travel and I will blend that with a little bit more of a peachy tone, or I will blend it with a tiny bit of a purple. If I'm using blue for the actual dress, like the shirt that she has, if you are looking at even like what I do, but also Audrey artwork, the gradient that I've used goes from like light yellow to green to blue to purple to red, and goes back to like peachy tones, and I can blend with a light green, and then I go and like added a bit of this pale yellow again and like light pink. I always have fun like that because that's how I create dimension. So the skin tone is, there's actually only R01 as a skin tone, but it's mainly on the light area, just to have a bit of a flesh color, but it's not actual flesh color because this is mixed with like yellows and pinks. To actually learn how to mix them, it's really about a gradual blend, and like you have to not be too scared of overlapping colors, especially if they are close together, because that's how they blend. And there's a lot of content with like actual blending technique, but how like the use of color is a lot about thinking how to connect them and how they can contrast together. And yeah, but it's pretty much always the same process. I just go from light to dark. That's one thing you have to take care of, light to dark. And the second thing is to work from, I guess, you can work also from like the brightness level, I mean, in terms of saturation, to a very muted color. You can also work from, like I said, a specific color. Let's just pick a rainbow, for example. You go from one family, start with blue. With blue, you can have purple or you can have greens. That's basically it. You can also have blue-green, like turquoise. You can also have some bluish purpley color, and then you can go from that. For example, my red, which is like my main color that I used the most in this piece, I think was BV02 and R35. The R35 is a very intense reddish coral type of red, and I was able to blend that with my arm, like with the pink. I also blended it with peach color. I also can try to blend that with a more of a like burgundy color with my colored liners. But surprisingly, it also can blend with any blue purple. So I would just have to add a bit of my like pinky color, and then I can blend that with a more of a purpley, and then I can blend with purple. I had like a bit of blue and just go from that. So yeah, that was basically my process with the colors. It's kind of hard to explain, but I hope you'll have some information that you can use yourself in your artworks. If you want to actually have a tutorial, like a very slow process of mixing color and doing multi-dimensional skin tones, for example, I'm still practicing myself. I'll learn a new thing in every single piece that I'm doing. So I'm still basically in a learning, so sharing how I do things. I just feel like I need to practice a bit more so I can make a proper tutorial. But yeah, I think it's still nice to share that process with you and to give you a few tips and tricks. And the technique basically can be used with every single tool. This is pretty much the same with watercolors or gouache. Even with acrylic paints, you can do pretty much the same thing. So I think I covered everything. This piece took about 2 hours and I'm really happy with the results. Kind of wish it was bigger, but this is the size that I'm doing for Patreon content. So if you'd like to check it out on Patreon, try to win this original, you can head up to my Patreon page and pledge to get the box. I hope you will find this video interesting, that you've learned something with like all the info that I gave about colors. And like I said, if you really like to see an actual tutorial how to create the same skin tone, for example, then post a comment below and tell me you'd like that, and I'll try to make this happen in a few weeks. So yeah, that's basically it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye, guys.